Well, hello, I'm Joy Partain. I'm with Fort Worth Opera, and with me is composer Jake Heggie. We are so thrilled to have you here today. We have lots of your questions to ask Jake about 3 Decembers and his life as a composer, and we're so excited that you sent in so many. So without further ado, we're going to launch right in. A fan wants to know something that I actually am curious about too. How long did it take to write 3 Decembers?
Oh, it's a little more complicated than what you might think, where I could give a specific answer. It's a very good question. I usually allow 2 to 2.5 years to write an opera, but the development process can take 3 to 4 years. The development process for 3 Decembers was nearly 7 years. I first encountered the short story that it's based on by Terrence McNally, Some Christmas Letters, in 2001. We had just opened Dead Man Walking in San Francisco, and we were looking for another project, and I specifically was looking for a project that was maybe 2 or 3 characters in a very chamber-sized orchestra, and something that I could specifically write for Frederica von Stade that would be a good role for her. And Terrence showed me this play that he had written. Well, it's really not even a play, it's a script for 3 characters over 3 different decades of their lives, and I fell in love with it immediately. And because it was originally read by Julie Harris, Cherry Jones, and Victor Garber in New York,
wow,
with the New York Gay Men's Chorus singing Christmas carols. First of all, he had music in mind when he wrote it, and also all of those people are such theater icons. And then all of a sudden I thought, well, maybe this could be the musical that I've always wanted to write, because I grew up much more from the musical theater world. I watched television incessantly as a child, and my sisters loved all the heavy rock musicals that came out, you know, Hair and Superstar and Godspell, and then I grew up watching movie musicals, Julie Andrews, my first goddess, and so I was always looking for some way, and somehow I wound up in opera. So when this project came up, I thought, well, maybe this is my chance to write something that sounds for the musical theater. And so the project took a wrong turn, and suddenly it became this huge, huge project that was way beyond what the initial thing that moved us was. And then it started to fall apart a little bit, and it was Flicka who said to me after 5 years when it started falling apart, and she said, you know, we've gotten pretty far away from what moved us originally, which was 3 characters over 3 different Decembers, their estrangement, their reunion, their sense of longing and ache in the middle of them. And so once we went back to that, and I also realized I am a theater composer, but what I do is I bring that musical theater sensibility in and write well for opera singers. And so it became an opera, a chamber opera with 3 characters, and very quickly after that, the whole thing came together. So it was about 2005 or 6 when we finally recognized what it was. Gene Shear came on as my librettist. He worked with it very quickly, and I'd say in about 1.5 years after we recognized the identity of the piece, we had the actual finished product. So it was a long gestation to try to find the identity of the piece, which is also somehow very fitting for this particular opera, because the story itself is a quest for identity. How do I fit in the world? How do I fit in a relationship outside of my family? How do I fit with my family? Who am I when I'm not with them? And through those 3 decades, I think we learned so much about them and how they connect with each other, where the loss is, where the sympathy is, where the struggle is. And so once I found the identity for the piece itself, I was able to actually then focus on the identity of the characters. And so then it was about 1.5 years. So that's a very long-winded answer, but it's not the easiest question because it had such a long period of development.
Well, that brings us, this is a really good follow-up. How did you come up with the various music for the characters?
That is a very good question. I depend a lot on, first of all, Madeline Mitchell is the primary character. She's this musical theater mother. Well, she's a theater actress, theater star, who has just started to sing in musicals, much to the mortification of her children. So there is a sense of the musical theater to her. And I like catering music and style to a specific character based on their traits, based on what's really happening in the middle of their heart. I figure my biggest job as a composer is to love the characters, empathize with them deeply, and let them emerge in a very truthful, authentic way, musically, theatrically. So first of all, it's listening to the language that they use. It's also the situation that they're in. How did they get there? Where are they? Where are they going in their life? What are their feelings and why? All of that information that I get from the libretto and from the words that they use, as well as the actions that they make. And then music starts to emerge. But with Madeline Mitchell, it was the rhythm of her name is the first thing you hear in the score. Madeline Mitchell, dum da dum 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 da dum dum dum, which to me sounds very sort of overture-like and like a big announcement, a fanfare almost. Which is what Madeline loves, of course, as a musical theater star. And for her children, it was Charlie's sort of separation from his family and his sense of loss, also his life growing up away from them in San Francisco. B, his sister, Madeline's daughter, who is very represses everything, doesn't want to tell the truth about her life, wants to know about everyone else and try to fix their life, but is very hesitant to fix her own life. So that suggested a different kind of music to me, but all dominated by Madeline Mitchell. So I think what I do is I get to know the characters. I have to know them well enough that I could go for a walk with them on the beach outside of the story and have a conversation and still know them well enough that their music would resonate. And I guess that is the big mystery about being a theater composer, is getting to know all these characters and just finding a musical world in which they all live and then letting them emerge as individuals within that world.
Speaking of that musical world, this is a great one. Was there a tune, a melody, or a specific chord progression that led you in a specific direction while you were composing this opera?
Oh boy, I write very organically. So I like to start at the beginning and be as surprised as the listener with the information that's coming at you. And what happens is, for example, the Madeline Mitchell theme that I just talked about, that happened right away. So that was underscored. And then there was this sort of fun connection between Charlie and Bea in the very first scene when they're reading one of their mother's Christmas letters and making fun of it and checking in with each other, as well as being present in their own individual lives. And it's holiday.
They're on the phone with each other at the time.
They're on the phone with each other, sharing their mother's annual Christmas letter, which in its own way is mortifying to them.
Sure.
In addition to the fact that she's going to sing on stage in a musical. To me, themes emerge, and then when it feels really strong and surprises me, somehow I will find a way to develop that further. So I develop it through the course of the work, and when a theme, like for example, one of the big themes in the piece is this meeting on the Golden Gate Bridge that the brother and sister have to try to remember things about their father, the father that they never knew. And a beautiful tune emerged in that theme, in that scene. And it became very important in terms of their connection, also in terms of the father that they never knew, how this all relates to their mother. And so that became a very visceral theme for me throughout the piece. But I'd say themes emerge and they come to represent specific moments or specific emotional moments or different connections that are associated with a character. And they somehow then just weave through the piece. It's just part of the way I work. I mean, I think you can listen to any one of my operas or even songs and you'll hear a main rhythmic motif or a main melodic motif that will carry through and will be developed in different ways. And it's to suggest place, it's to suggest character, it's to suggest especially the emotional content of a scene.
That brings us nicely to, as a composer with such richly textured songs as the Bridge Duet from 3 Decembers and the Parents Quintet from Act 1 of Dead Man Walking, have you ever considered setting these songs for a string ensemble? Can we expect an orchestral suite of your most celebrated opera tunes sometime in the future?
No.
Okay.
But it's a very good question. I did make an orchestral suite of music from Dead Man Walking about 10 years ago for the Dallas Symphony Orchestra, actually.
Okay.
And I found it very, very, very difficult to do, actually, because it was taking music that was written to tell a story, to tell a narrative, and try to reassemble it so that it made a whole and still made sense, but without the context of the drama and the story that was going on. I just found it very, very difficult, because it's literally taking a huge piece like an opera and reimagining it completely. But I have used the bridge duet from 3 Decembers in my flute concerto, which I wrote for Carol Winsense.
Okay.
I think that's the only piece from an opera of mine that I've actually put into an instrumental piece. But it worked particularly well because it's a very beautiful tune that spins out over time, and I was able to play with it, and it just stands on its own. But so far I've tried to write fresh music for each project that I do, but I am not averse to making arrangements at some point.
Okay. I like this one. One might assume it's easier to write a chamber opera like 3 Decembers than a grand scale opera, but is that the case?
Each project has its own demands, and I'd say it is a very good question, because it would seem that it would be easier to write a smaller opera. But if you're writing an hour and a half to 2.5 hours of music, no matter what scale,
it's still an hour and a half.
It's still a demanding process, because to spin a story and develop character in a grand opera, you have the opportunity for a lot of different characters to distract. But in a smaller opera, you really have to focus on these characters and their journeys and how you're going to use them without tiring them out completely as well. You have to be very conscious of that, of just stamina getting through a piece. But I'd say they each require an enormous amount of thought and preparation time to do. So whether it's an opera the scale of Dead Man Walking or Moby-Dick, or whether it's something that's the scale of 3 Decembers or The End of the Affair or To Hell and Back, each requires quite a long time of mental preparation for me to get to know the characters, the story, the narrative, and have a musical response to that. I'd say there are pieces like song cycles I know I can write in a shorter amount of time, but developing a theater piece, it takes time, because it's a big landscape that you're creating and working with. It's not a smaller vision, nor is it a little set of songs. But that said, I would always rather work on a big project than a lot of little projects. I find it much more interesting to sort of delve and completely immerse myself in a big landscape of something like an opera. Although I still love to write songs, and I'm doing a lot of that these days too.
Okay.
Yeah.
How do you pick the subject matter for your operas?
That also is a very good question. Usually there's something that's either resonated, or someone I know or trust will suggest an idea. Ironically, the constant throughout all of my operas is Terrence McNally, the great American playwright. He suggested Dead Man Walking. He also suggested The End of the Affair, even though he didn't write the libretto. He also suggested, well, he didn't suggest, but he wrote the original story that 3 Decembers is based upon. So and even though he didn't write the libretto, it sprang from his imagination.
Sure.
And it was also his idea to do Moby-Dick. So, and now I'm writing another opera with him, which is based on an original story called Great Scott. But, for different reasons, for some reason, that has been a constant through all of my operatic work. But in smaller works, song cycles, other stage works, it's usually something that I go to with the librettist, either that or it's something that just has resonated so strongly. I just recently wrote a set of songs for Joyce DiDonato and string quartet based on the life and work of the French sculptor Camille Claudel. And there was a great movie about Claudel in the late 80s called Camille Claudel. She was Rodin's lover and was institutionalized for the last 30 years of her life, and only recently recognized as the great genius that she was.
Wow.
And it was a subject I had wanted to grapple with for a long time, and I thought it might be an opera. But then this opportunity came up to write this big piece for Joyce and the Alexander String Quartet in San Francisco. And I thought, this is the time. And I shared the idea with Gene, and he was just in love with it right away. And it turned out to be a really strong project. But you know, that's something that I had in mind. And then one other piece, like I wrote a two-woman opera with Baroque orchestra for Isabel Bayraktaryan, the soprano, and Patti LuPone,
wow,
the Broadway singer, and a Baroque orchestra.
Wow. And
it was the Philharmonia Baroque Orchestra's first commission. And so I wanted to do something that made sense in the Baroque realm, with something that sprang from mythology or classic literature. And Jean Shear, who was my librettist for that, came up with the idea of, let's do a play on the Persephone myth. But we'll modernize it so that Stephanie, instead of Persephone, isn't dragged to hell. What happens is she's trapped in an abusive marriage. And then it became a story about domestic violence. But in mythological terms, and it worked so beautifully. I'm so proud of that piece. So there are many different ways. Some things come from the librettist, something from me, sometimes from an outside source. Someone will say, have you ever read, like one time someone said to me, have you ever read Van Gogh's letters, the actual letters? And I hadn't, and I was looking for something for the subject of a big song cycle. And I read these letters, and it was very clear that I wanted to do something with those. So many, many different ways. But it has to be something that surprises and slightly terrifies me. I can't take on a project without feeling a little bit terrified by it, because by being a little scared of it, I'll have a sense that I can accomplish it, but at the same time, it will keep my attention and my interest for the length of the period to write it. That is particularly true with something as big as an opera, where it just, we're going to be living with this for several years. So it has to be something that pulls at my heart and soul strong enough to want to engage me for that many years and keep me sustained and surprised. What I find is not a good thing is when I suggest an idea for someone and they go, yeah, that makes sense. That's a terrible response. The best response is, how are you going to do that? Why are you going to do that? How's that going to work? That's a good response, because it means people are curious to know how it is actually going to happen.
Sure.
But ideas come from many different places. It depends on the size of the project, the scope, where it's coming from, who it's for. Is there a specific occasion? Is there a specific venue? All of that feeds into it as well.
Well, you've led us very well to 3 or 4 questions, and I do want to say that if we don't get to yours, I'm so sorry.
It's just because I'm a long-winded guy. Never put the composer on mic.
Let's go with this one.
Okay.
Most of your operas have been based on a play or book, as you've been talking about. Given that you used to be a professional writer, have you ever thought about writing your own story for an opera?
You know, the part of the that's a very good question. The part of the art form that interests me the most is the collaborative element. If I were to write my own libretto, first of all, I would be nervous all the time, because I would feel like I'm not getting enough perspective. But the part that I love is the back and forth. That's what really engages me. That's why I love accompanying singers or playing chamber music, is that constant engagement and back and forth. And what I love about opera is the collaborative process, because it's not just me and a librettist, it's also a director, it's also a conductor, it's also designers, and it's singers. So there's constant sharing of ideas, and that part stimulates my musical imagination very much. And I always figure too, I'm not a professional writer, so I'm going to leave that to the professionals. I thought wherever possible, leave it to the professionals.
You've written for some wonderful singers, Flicka, Susie Graham, Joyce DiDonato, you mentioned lucky. Isabel Bayraktaryan, Patti LuPone. Are there any younger, less established singers that have inspired you to write for them? And also, what makes a voice stand out to you? Great question.
That's, yeah, very good and multi-layered. I love singers. Singers are my people. Whenever I go somewhere, to a university or a campus or a theater, I'm always making a beeline for the singers. I just relate and connect with them so well and love them so much. And I admire and appreciate so much the courage that it takes, and the discipline and the time and energy and investment that it takes to be a singer. So I just have always had a great connection with singers. And there are many, many different voices that inspire me. I've listened to, I do a program called Songfest during the summer in Los Angeles, and have met so many wonderful young singers through that. I've been at Ravinia a few times, and then again, all these different campuses where I do residencies. Sometimes you'll just hear a voice that just, you know, and I don't know why it particularly touches me, but it does. And I think it's when it's not only a beautiful sound, but there's great authenticity and sincerity and heart. I like that there's actual joy in the singing too. I think what people love to respond to when you think of a singer on a stage is someone who is so joyful and happy to be up on that stage. Regardless of whether they're singing something tragic or happy, you just sense this energy vibrating. They're awake, they're alive. And I find that very attractive in singers, that aliveness, that awakeness, that energy flow. And then when the singer has done their work and they have formed a real opinion about what they're singing about, you feel like they know what they're singing about, and it comes from a place of truth for them because they've signed the contract, they know what they're singing about. They didn't just sign it, they read it and signed it, you know. But it's a combination of things. But I know it when I see it or hear it, and but I embrace and appreciate, you know, all singers for the hard work that they do. I've often said I don't think there is a harder job than being an opera singer, with the years of study and discipline and training and all that you have to do. And then you have to wait for permission for someone to hire or engage you to be on a stage in front of people to do what you do. And then, you know, audiences can be very loving and kind. They can also be very cruel. It can be a very cruel profession. So a singer has to develop a thicker skin, I think, than almost anybody, because you're going to get advice not only from the audience, but from the director, the designer, the conductor, the backstage people, your costumer, all of these people. And I have endless gratitude that they are willing to get up there and bare their hearts and souls for us all.
This is a marvelous one. When does inspiration hit you? The stereotype is that a new aria or overture wakes you up in the middle of the night or hits you while you're at the gym or in the grocery store. Is that really how it happens?
It can be, sure. Yeah, I usually find it in the least likely times. I figure composing is such an unusual process.
Yes.
Well, I mean, it's what I do, so I'm used to it now. But what's going on in my brain is so unusual that sometimes doing very usual things is exactly what I need to do. Take the dog for a walk, go to the beach, go to the gym. It'd be better if I did that a little more. Cook, clean the house, do laundry, you know, all those things. And sometimes, just because things are percolating, the idea happens, and usually when I least expect it. Sometimes it will happen in my studio while I'm working, while I'm near the piano, or when I'm just at my desk. But it's very hard to say when and where. I generally have several projects going at a time, and even though I can only work on one of them, I can only work consecutively on projects, focus on one, finish it, and then move on to the next. What I can do is develop several at a time so that they're in my head, and when it comes time to write, I've been doing work on it all along without even realizing it. And again, if it's a project that really inspires me, that's why I'll take it on in the first place. So even when the project is suggested, I'll have a sense of inspiration or music. Like when Terrence McNally suggested Moby-Dick, I gasped, I picked my jaw up off the floor, but I could automatically hear music. I could imagine the music. It wasn't specific music, but it was music. So I knew I had something to say. And then I felt like I really had to say it. So usually there has to be inspiration before I even begin the project. And then that will just percolate and develop along as I progress.
Okay. Well, speaking of the grandness of Moby-Dick, does the subject matter tell you whether it should be a chamber piece or a grand piece?
Oh, I think so. I think the subject matter will determine many things. It will determine not only the size and shape of the piece, but also the size theater that it's right for. 3 Decembers, I'm so thrilled here at Fort Worth Opera because they're doing it in, is it about a 500-seat theater?
It is, the Scott Theater.
The Scott Theater is about 500 seats. And that is the perfect size. It's a 3-character opera with 11 instrumentalists. And it's 3 characters over 3 different decades of their lives. And if it's I've seen it in a big hall, and the piece just somehow gets lost. It doesn't make sense there. So yes, the story, the characters, their journeys will dictate the best sort of situation, and also the forces, whether it should be a large orchestra or a small orchestra, or whether it's more appropriate for a song cycle. Camille Claudel, which I talked about, I had initially thought of as an opera between Claudel and Rodin and some other characters. But now, having done the cycle for just mezzo-soprano and string quartet, I think that's the best incarnation that I could have hoped for because of the great intimacy.
I think we have time for one more question, which is really hard to do. I think we're going to go with, after a new opera has finished its premiere performances, do you enjoy seeing later productions of it elsewhere?
Absolutely.
Like here?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, that is the test of whether a piece has actual legs, is can other people do it? Can it be done with different visions in different venues? And if it can, then the piece itself is sound and strong. And I'm also very fascinated because I imagine a character and a role. I write the role, but I write it for specific people. And then it's very important for me to stay true to that in the initial process. But what I'm very curious about once the piece is done is, what will other singers bring to it? Because they have a different experience with it. They don't have the whole creation of it or a connection with me involved. They're coming at it fresh with their lives, their experience, their particular gifts. And so to see that realized, and then to have a director come with a whole new vision, like I'm very excited what this cast and creative team has done with 3 Decembers. And I'm really, really eager to see how it plays out. I've done that with Dead Man Walking all over the globe, and with a bunch of my other pieces. But to hear different interpretations, I think it's terribly exciting to see what other people will bring to it, and whether the piece actually has legs.
We're excited too. We are opening 3 Decembers in just about a week and a half. On May 13th, it runs for 6 performances. We hope to see you there. You can get tickets at fwopera.org. And if you've missed any part of this, it'll be archived on our YouTube channel. It should be there in a day or two, and it'll be there for a good long time. So thank you, Jake, so much. Thank you, our fans, for your wonderful questions, and we'll see you at the opera.
Absolutely.